Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, dubious speculation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Bitcoin is now at $107,000. It is May 20th. Well, I guess in the Cryptoverse, it's May 21st since we're looking at UTC time or so. But we are looking at $107,000 Bitcoin. It has had a really nice rally here after the death cross that we got. And remember, in the last couple of years, we had pretty impressive rallies after these death crosses, right? And this time has, again, turned out to, in fact, be no different. And Bitcoin has had a really nice rally here. Now, one thing to think about is the timing of things, okay? And of course, post-halving years tend to be different than, halving years and pre-halving years and what happens. They tend to throw you curveballs. It kind of will set up the bear market year and the midterm year. Just because so many curveballs get thrown, people end up chasing and whatnot, and they end up getting wrecked in the midterm year. But one interesting thing about sort of the breakouts that Bitcoin has had in the last couple of years is that the big breakout, and again, this year could be different, right? I'm not suggesting that it can't be different. I'm just saying that the last couple of years, the major breakouts occurred in late October or early November. In 2023, you can see that Bitcoin actually put in a new cycle high in June, right? And even in July, right? There was a new cycle high put in before the weakness in the third quarter. Last year, Bitcoin tried to put in a new high, but it was unable to, right? It tried in May, and then it tried again in June. It was unable to. Now, at the end of the year, right, in Q4, Bitcoin still broke out, just like it broke out in 2023. But you can see there was underlying weakness in the market in the third quarter of the year, okay? So now we have weakness at a different time than we normally do. You can see that the only times in the last 2 years, if you exclude this one, the only times that Bitcoin really spent a lot of time below the bull market's whip was in Q3 of 2023 and Q3 of 2024. So what I'm looking at here, especially if you take this line a little further down and just kind of, if you ignore that first top and you just look at these, you can see that that's where Bitcoin had trouble breaking through. And then it did eventually break through in the fourth quarter. So we're kind of coming up to that area again. And let me just clean this up a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. We're kind of coming up to that level once again. And the question is can we durably break through? Okay? Now, there's a big difference between going a little higher, like we did in 2023, and durably breaking through. So let's see what happens here. Now, you might say, well, why are you being deterministic about weakness potentially out in Q3? Historically, the third quarter of the year just isn't that great for Bitcoin. Now, the question is, does it lead to a higher low or a lower low, right? If you look at quarterly returns for Bitcoin, look at Q3 the last 3 years, right? Q3 has been red the last 3 years. 2017, obviously, we had a green Q3, but this also hasn't really been playing out like 2017, right? In 2017, Bitcoin went up 9% in Q1, and then it went up 125% in Q2, right? This is down 10% in Q1, and obviously we still have a little over a month in Q2, but, it's only up around 26%. So it's not exactly 2017, even if you look at year-to-date ROI. I'm just going based off the data. I understand that it could always be a green Q3. I'm just giving you, look, there's potential that you could see a drawdown in Q3 if you get kind of a repetition of what happened the last couple of years. It doesn't have to necessarily be a lot, right? But, a lot of times Bitcoin just doesn't do that well, especially in sort of that August, September timeframe. So in thinking about that, you could argue that if Bitcoin's going to put in a new cycle high, then the time to do so would be sometime over the next couple of weeks. And the reason I say that is because last year, Bitcoin put in an attempt to put in a new high, and there was a local top on the 21st of May, but then it tried again in June, right? It tried again in June. It's trying here. It's the 21st of May. In 2023, it tried in June, and then it tried in July. Okay? So, I think the argument here is that if Bitcoin is going to do it, then this would be the time to do it, right? This is the attempt. And even if it gets rejected here, right, even if Bitcoin gets rejected, there still is a good chance it'll try again in a couple of weeks, right? So, and the reason I say that is because if we get this golden cross in the next day or two, not all examples, because 2023, we had a golden cross and Bitcoin didn't correct at all, and anyone who was waiting for a correction just got left behind, okay? So I'm not suggesting that you have to have a correction by the golden cross. It does sometimes occur, right? It does sometimes occur. Look at 2021, which was a post-halving year. You can see we had a golden cross, and then there was this correction by Bitcoin down to the 20-week moving average. So I'm not saying it has to occur, but if there is a drop here by Bitcoin after the golden cross, then look for it to try to hold support at either the 50-day SMA or the 200-day SMA, and potentially try again to break out, right? It certainly could happen again. Now, the hard part is no one knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, obviously, a lot of people pretend to know, and they're very bold about it. And when they're wrong, they quietly retreat. And when they're right, they get really loud about it. I've fallen into that trap as well. I'm not trying to say that it's other people that always do it. I've done it too. But the point is, as an investor, right? As an investor, we can't actually know what's going to happen, right? We can't know what's going to happen. If we did, if everyone knew what was going to happen, well, the price would already reflect that, right? The price would already be where everyone's knowing where it goes, right? Like if everyone in the world thought that Bitcoin should be at 120K, then, why would it be sitting at 107, right? Everyone who thinks that, if it's everyone in the world, right, it would, people would buy it until it reached what they thought the fair value would be. But it's a market, right? And obviously not everyone believes that. And so as an investor, you kind of always have to think like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to make sure I have exposure to the upside, and I want to make sure I minimize my downside risk. What have I said for years about Bitcoin? It gives you exposure to the upside, it minimizes your downside, right? For years, I've said that, and I haven't changed my view. I still think that view holds. It gives you exposure to the upside, it minimizes your downside, okay? So if Bitcoin does break out here, well, good thing you were holding Bitcoin. If it doesn't and it gets rejected, it would still likely try to come back up a little later on, kind of like it did the last couple of years, right? In Q4, it came back up and it broke out. In Q4, that was 2023. In Q4 of 2024, it came back up and broke out. Even if Q4, we get a recession and it doesn't break out, it'll likely still come right back up. The problem for the people that are more focused on, say, like altcoins, is if you look at Bitcoin, it's basically back at new all-time highs or very close to it. But if you were to overlay total 3, you can see they're nowhere close, right? They're nowhere close. They've gotten annihilated. And obviously, everyone's going to just simply try to retort. They'll say, well, just you wait for alt season, you're going to get left behind. Guys, if I had a Satoshi every time someone told me I was missing alt season, I would probably have an entire Bitcoin just from the Satoshis I collected from people telling me that. To me, what you have to be careful of with alts is what happens if they're just kind of repeating, what happened last year, where you first have this high, you have another high, and this is just sort of your second, another lower high. I mean, last year we had several of these, and it didn't really break out until Q4. And notice that while total 3 had these lower highs, Bitcoin also sort of had lower highs, but really, I mean, if you just look at it on the daily time frame, it was still mostly returning back to the cycle highs on these massive drops, massive lower highs by the altcoin market. So look at this again this year, right? You see these massive drops on these potentially lower highs, but Bitcoin is still way up here. So even in the case where Bitcoin gets rejected and comes back down, it would still likely have another rally later on. And imagine if it did that and Bitcoin's back up here later on this year, the altcoin market would probably be way down here. You see, kind of like what it did last year. So you really have to be careful with that, because generally speaking, Bitcoin leads, right? Bitcoin leads. Now you might say, well, hold on a second, Ben. Last cycle, we saw altcoins do really, really well in 2020 and 2021. So why is this time different? Right? Why is this time different? And you're right, this time is different. If you look at the advanced decline index of the top 100 cryptocurrencies in 2020 and 2021, last cycle, the ADI was going up, meaning everything was doing well. But this cycle, the ADI has been going down since November of 2021. I don't control it, right? I'm just telling you guys that that's what's happening. Only a few cryptocurrencies are actually responsible for the bull market. Most cryptocurrencies have done nothing for the last 3 to 4 years, except drop a lot in 2022, bounce at some point in 2023 and 2024, but then ultimately just kind of come back down to where they were about mid-2022, right? Like a lot of them are in that scenario right now. They never truly broke out, and you can see it's because this area matches what happened over here during the last cycle when quantitative tightening was going on. Now, there's a chance that QT might end at some point this year. I think there's a good chance that it will. And so obviously the trend can change if and when that happens, but it just goes to show you this massive divergence between, Bitcoin and the altcoin market, right? Like the altcoin market isn't really doing much of the lifting as far as sort of the bull market for the Cryptoverse goes. It's mostly Bitcoin doing the heavy lifting, right? And it has been for a long time. Okay. You guys know me, right? I mean, I called for Ethereum to go home for a long time, and I'm glad I did because it finally went home. And after it went home, guess what? It rallied 2x, right? That's what happens when ETH goes home. Gets a nice little rally here, right? But even ETH that had this rally, which is great, right? It's great. It still just rallied to where it was in May of 2022. To think about that in perspective, for Bitcoin, where it was in May of 2022 would basically put Bitcoin at 30K. So yeah, I mean, like it's a nice rally, and I'm glad that I waited for it to go home. But at the end of the day, Ethereum has not really contributed much to the total market cap this cycle, and neither have many of the altcoins. It's mostly just Bitcoin. And the only reason alts are even going up to begin with is because Bitcoin is lifting them up. But if the only reason alts are going up is because Bitcoin is lifting them up, then why not just hold Bitcoin, Like, why not just hold the thing that's leading the bull market in the first place? What happened the last 2 years during the summer lulls? You know what happened the last 2 years? You might say nothing happened, right? Bitcoin just kind of was range bound for this entire period. So nothing really happened. But a lot happened during that time, if you know where to look. Bitcoin dominance, my friends. Look at what Bitcoin dominance was doing during those range bound periods. And even so far this cycle, or this year. Look at this. Once the sort of the high was set for that 6-month period, Bitcoin dominance just shot up. Here, once the high was set for that 7 to 8 month period, Bitcoin dominance was just shooting up. And look over here, look at this high. Ever since that was set, Bitcoin dominance has just been shooting up. So, even in the environment where you get a summer lull, even if we do put in a new all-time high, right? Even if we do, Bitcoin dominance is probably going to go up. Probably. Yes, at some point it will likely top out, and yes, I'm sure everyone will sort of dunk on me, and I will take it, guys. I mean, I'm fine with that. The point is that when you're an investor in the Cryptoverse, you don't base your not financial advice, right? But you don't want to invest or base your entire strategy around DCAing, micro cap altcoins for the elusive alt season that happens like once every 4 years, right? Like, yes, it will occasionally happen, But do you really want to invest for the other 4 years or the 3.8 years of the cycle into altcoins that are just bleeding back to Bitcoin just so for like 2 months you get that rally? Because again, if you've been DCAing alts throughout this entire phase, you require an alt season just to get to break even. Whereas if you were in Bitcoin the entire time, you don't require anything to be up right now, right? Bitcoin's already almost at new all-time highs. So I get what people are saying, right? Again, everyone tells me I'm going to miss alt season, but look, one thing to consider is that the last 2 alt seasons occurred from range lows, right? Like this alt season in 2017 occurred from the range lows, and then this alt season even occurred slightly lower than that, right? So everyone keeps calling for an alt season to start here, but I just keep thinking, why? Like, why won't alts just go back to where they went last cycle and where they went the cycle before that? Why not? Because I think alts are oscillators at best. And so if we do get a summer lull, let's say Bitcoin does go to new all-time high and then pulls back, or if it just a slightly lower high, if you do get kind of like a lull period in the summer, then Bitcoin might not really go anywhere. It might kind of bounce around for a while, but alts would likely go down a lot, as they did last year and as they did the year before during the summer lull. Now, I know a lot of people are following other indicators that would suggest a major breakout in the summer, and it's always a possibility, right? Like I'm not going to sit here and say that it can't happen. I know that post-halving years can throw curveballs, because a lot of times it's those curveballs that lead people to chase, and then it sets up the midterm year bear market, right? So it's certainly possible that none of that stuff happens, right? And then those people are right, that it just, you sort of see it go up into the summer and it doesn't really pull back. That's always a chance, but guess what? Even in that environment, you're still going to be better off with Bitcoin than a lot of altcoins, right? Because if Bitcoin goes into price discovery mode, people don't want to miss out, right? Everyone wants to join in on the Bitcoin rallies, right? When Bitcoin moves a lot of alts don't really move a lot. They just sit still and they watch Bitcoin. I used to say that last cycle all the time. When the dog's away, the cat will play, right? So when Bitcoin's not doing anything, Ethereum might do something. And if the cat's away, then the mice will play, and the mice are altcoins. But if the dog's out, right, the cat and mice are going to hide. That's what they always do when Bitcoin starts to move. So it just seems to me like whether Bitcoin breaks out, breaks down, or goes sideways, you're likely going to see alts underperform. It's possible in the short term that Ethereum still does okay on its Bitcoin pair, right? Like that one's doing better than most everything else right now. In the very, very short term, right? Over the long term, Ethereum's been absolutely horrible over the last 3 years. Good thing we were on the right side of that, right? I mean, we called for that for years. But the point is, if this is just simply repeating what happened over here, it could still spend a few weeks up here, right? Even a couple of months before coming back down. In fact, if it were to follow that pattern, then the next sort of higher low could occur in the August to September timeframe. If you look at sort of a date range here on the amount of time from low to low, about 18 weeks. So if you go from low to low and you say about 18 weeks, that puts you out in September. You know what's interesting about September? I'm glad you asked. That's when the markets are currently thinking the Fed's going to cut rates next. So think about that, because if Ethereum does drop back down in Q3, it would likely cause alt Bitcoin pairs to go to a lower low. You might say, well, why would alts go to a lower low if ETH Bitcoin pulls back? Why would that be? They're already basically at a lower low now, right? I mean, they're already at 0.35. Hell, the low is only 0.33, right? So if alts are already at nearly a lower low, if ETH Bitcoin were to get a drop in Q3, it would likely easily take alt Bitcoin pairs down here. And I've said that many, many times, that you could get a scenario where ETH Bitcoin bottoms, gets a bounce, a big bounce, but the altcoin market doesn't partake in it. And the reason for that is because Ethereum already bled out a lot on its Bitcoin pair, whereas altcoins didn't really see that same thing. Ethereum went home, but now it's time for altcoins to go home. And going home means going to the range lows. And if you look at the last couple of years, what you'll notice is that altcoins had drops it had a drop here in June, and then in June. And then here in October, November, and look over here, October, November, right? So what if this time's not different, right? What if all Bitcoin pairs form a lower low in about mid to late June, which is when they did the last couple of years, right? It was just late, the last week of June in 2023, and in 2024 is sort of mid-June. And then maybe an even lower low in October, late October, early November. I think it's a possibility, right? I really do. But because of that, right? Because of that, it just makes sense to stick with Bitcoin, in my opinion. And in a scenario, if Bitcoin does not break out to a higher high, if Bitcoin does not take out these highs, or if it comes back down, you're still going to be better off with Bitcoin more than likely, right? Because you can already see, if you look at total 3, right? I mean, you can already see that it's not, it really hasn't made it anywhere close to these other highs, even though Bitcoin has. Kind of did, what it did last year. And the breakout last year didn't occur until sort of later on in the year. Sort of the drop from here down to the time where it finally broke out was about 28 weeks. I don't really know how long it's been here. 24, right? So I'm not saying it can't happen, but it could still be a little ways away, right? It could still be a little ways away before you actually see that. And so I think in the short term, Bitcoin will likely continue to do better. And even in this case, right, if you look at it like that, I said 28 weeks, but if you connect the wick to the wick, and you look at it like that, I mean, alts, when they broke out, they then eventually back tested, and then the real move didn't occur until how many weeks later from the initial high? 34 weeks. So 34 weeks would put you out in July, right? I mean, even further out. So I think a lot of kind of what happens is going to depend on, the macro, right, to some degree. The main things to think about going into the summer, labor market, probably you're going to see the unemployment rate go up because it did the last 2 summers. And you'll probably get another rate hike by the Bank of Japan at some point this summer. My guess is July, but we'll see. So those are the things to consider as it relates to altcoins. I still think Bitcoin is the better place to be in the short term. But we'll see. We'll see if that ultimately is right or not. I certainly could. I could be wrong. I think the hard part is just thinking, like, since we already had this drop below the bull market support band in Q1, do we also have to have it in Q3 like the last 2 years? Because these are both in Q3. Does that have to happen? Or do we get to just skip over it since we already had it? The optimist would say we can skip over it. We already had the weakness when people didn't think we would, so now let's just go up. The pessimist would say you still get weakness in Q3, and maybe it's due to, macro conditions becoming worse or something, right? The good news is even if you do get a drop in Q3, could be a higher low, right? I mean, it was in 2023, it could be a higher low. In 2024, it was a lower low, right? So it's kind of interesting because in 2023, you had a higher high and a higher low. Last year, you had a lower high and a lower low. There's part of me that wonders if what happens if you put in a slightly higher high and then you put in a slightly lower low, right? Where it starts to get this expanding, broadening wedge. Like, I wonder if that is what's going to happen, right? Where you get this broadening wedge or something where it basically just kind of oscillates back and forth, like something like that. Because that could play out. Right, that could play out. And if it did, I guess it'd put Bitcoin, not that much higher than the prior all-time highs. Kind of like what it did in 2023, right? Where it just goes a little bit higher and then drops back down. But anyways, something to think about. And we'll see if Bitcoin can break through here, right? Or if it takes a little bit longer. In terms of a time frame from when the high was formed in 2023 until it durably broke out, it took 28 weeks. In 2024, it took 34 weeks. If we take this high it's been 22. If we actually take the later high, it would be longer. But I mean, let's not take the later high because we're not going to take this later high. Let's just take the initial high, right? So if it takes 28 weeks to break out, that would put you in June. If it takes 30, that would be if it followed 2023. If it follows 2024, that would put you in August, right? If it takes longer, right? I mean, this was 6 weeks longer. So let's say, what if it takes 40 weeks? That would put you, late September. I think a lot of this analysis is just going to be dependent on what Bitcoin does here over the next couple of weeks. Because one of the interesting things as well with Bitcoin is that in 2023, it put in a new high. So you would probably assume that total market cap did as well, right? But it actually didn't, right? It actually didn't. Total market cap put in a lower high. So high, lower high. Even in this year, right? Or the last few months, right? High, lower high. So a high in December and then a lower high in January. But Bitcoin put in a higher high in January. And if it puts in a higher high now, it could still correspond to a lower high by total market cap, right? If you connect the wicks, right? I mean, it could still correspond to a lower high by total market cap at around 3.5 trillion. Like that. It's really crazy when you think about how much stronger Bitcoin has been, right? Because all these were lower highs by total market cap. But here was a higher high by Bitcoin in the summer of 2023 and a higher high by Bitcoin in January 2020. It's the altcoin market that's struggling. It hasn't been Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin's been pulling its weight for a while now. So there's some dubious speculation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.